Alright, so at this point we have our entire upper receiver itself assembled with the forward assist back here and our dust cover. So I'll give you a little bit of a close-up of that Strike Industries forward assist back here. Again, that added texturing will hopefully create an improvement, and then our dust cover right there. So in this part, what I'm going to be doing is installing the barrel that I have from Faxon. Those of you who have seen the Haas USMC's videos about Faxon barrels, I think I'm in all of them, if not most of them. And then I also did his review for the 18-inch fluted Faxon barrel in 5.56. I gotta say, I was hugely impressed with the success that I had with that barrel. I was shooting well under sub-MOA groups. I had a 1/2 inch and a 3/4 inch group with mil-spec ammo. So out of a barrel that is well within the price range of most people's builds, I think that is exceptional. So I went ahead and went with Faxon. I went with their 10.5 inch barrel, again in 300 blackout. It has a 1 in 8 twist. Now you can theoretically go shorter in 300 blackout and still get pretty good results out of the cartridge. That's one thing that's really great about 300 blackout. I went ahead and went with 10.5 inches because that's what they have right now. I wouldn't be surprised if, again, they have more options to choose from in the future. And then I also went with Faxon for their gas system. And then as far as the handguard, I have one of these really cool Generation 3 M-LOK handguards. So this is the 9 1/4 inch handguard. So it's going to come right up to just about the end of the barrel. There's a lot of really cool things about this handguard that I like, but I'm going to show you that right before I install it. But first, I'm going to walk you guys through the actual attachment of the barrel, and with the barrel nut provided by Midwest Industries, and then we'll attach the handguard itself. So let's get this thing blocked up. So one of the first things I noticed when I received my Faxon barrel through the mail was how much care they put into just the actual shipping of it. It was very well packaged, it was very secure, it was not going to be bumped around, so it came in immaculate condition. You have a cap over here protecting the threads on one end, and just FYI, I believe that is an 11-degree crown on there. If that's not the correct number, I'll go ahead and put an annotation telling you what the right thread pitch or the angle of the bevel. And then you also have a cap protecting the chamber end with the barrel extension on there. Now one thing you'll probably notice on here is it does have the dual feed ramps, so that's a really nice thing on there. It's almost hard to find barrels that don't have that anymore, so that's a really nice thing to have on there as well. So as you can see, I got my upper receiver here blocked up. I'm a big proponent of having the proper tools for the job, so buying something like an upper receiver block I think is hugely important. There are some alternatives out there. The Geisley has their reaction rod, and Magpul has their own upper receiver block that locks into the barrel extension, so that those are really good options out there as well. But this is just what we have. Again, if you do a group buy, it makes it a lot easier per person, and the tools are there in case anyone needs it. Now one thing you'll notice is on the top of the barrel here you have that little nubbin, and that nubbin is going to correspond with this little cutout in the top of the threads up here on the upper receiver. All you really got to do is slide that right on there, just like that. It's really that simple. Now the next step is going to be putting on the barrel nut. Now as far as the barrel nut goes, on the Midwest Industries rail it is provided. And this is one of the reasons that I wanted to go with Midwest Industries. So while I remove these screws, I want to explain something. Now on standard, M4 rifles, like the M16A2 or anything like that, you have the old school D-ring style barrel nut, and even on most new AR style rifles, it's going to have that old school barrel nut style. So let me show you what that is. So this is another stripped upper I have. Take this barrel nut off. As you can see, this thing is super fat, which means that there's only one slot back here where that gas tube can go through, and sometimes it can be an enormous pain to get it to the correct torque and get that lined up with the actual gas port up here in the top of the receiver. So what Midwest Industries did is they eliminated the need for having to line that up, having to time it correctly, and you have this super slim line barrel nut. Now you're saying, oh, but they use a special tool. Why do they use a special tool that no one is going to have? Well, I don't know if you noticed in the packaging before, but they actually provide you with the correct tool. So all you need is a breaker bar, or more appropriately, a torque wrench to be able to actually attach this on. So what I'm going to do is, before I actually attach this, I'm going to be using grease. Now, a lot of people use whatever grease they have, and there's nothing wrong with that, theoretically, but you're supposed to be using some sort of moly grease. Now the big thing to look out for is you don't want there to be any copper or any graphite, because those will cause some galvanic corrosion, I believe it is. If I'm incorrect on that, I'm sure people will correct me. Most people don't care about it, but I figure this again was less than $4 from my local auto parts store, so I might as well use it. All I'm going to do is I'm going to just apply a little bit of that around the threads of the upper receiver. Now there are people who don't use any grease at all, and even worse, there are people who use stuff like super glue or Loctite to actually put their barrels on, and I cannot tell you enough that how bad of an idea that is. As long as you use the correct torque, it's not going to be an issue. So a little bit of grease is just fine. Now if you think that putting some sort of anti-seize or grease on there is not going to allow it to be secure, I want to point out real quick that on the F-15 fighter jet, which I used to work on in the Air Force, the engines, which combined produce about 80,000 pounds of thrust, somewhere between 60 and 80,000 pounds of thrust, are held on by bolts with anti-seize on it. So if anti-seize would cause it to not be properly torqued down, then obviously jets would be falling out of the air all the time, and that doesn't normally happen unless it's an F-16. So now that I got the grease on there, I'm just going to slide this barrel nut down over the barrel, and I'm just going to first get this thing nice and hand tight. Now again, there are also people who will do torque to 30 foot-pounds, then break it, 30 foot-pounds, then break it, 30 foot-pounds, and break it, and that's to kind of get the threads conditioned to get the threads on the upper conditioned to the threads on the barrel nut. However, Midwest Industries does a very good job of explaining exactly what you need to do on the back of the packaging here, and they are very specific about their instructions. And they make it very clear too that modification or alteration to these parts will void the warranty, and if you don't actually follow these instructions, it'll void the warranty. And I'll put a close-up of my favorite part on there, which basically says if you don't do this exactly, then we know you didn't follow the instructions and it voids your warranty. So let me grab my torque wrench real quick. So I have my torque wrench here set for 40 foot-pounds, which is what the instructions call for. All I'm going to do is put the tool onto the torque wrench. I believe it's a 1/2 inch drive, and then I am going to lock that onto this barrel nut. Alright, so all I'm going to do now is apply the torque and wait until the torque wrench breaks. Alright, so that's it. 40 foot-pounds right there. Now this is properly torqued on. Now I know a lot of people out there are going to say, oh, but you're not doing the correct torque because you're actually doing more torque because this isn't aligned properly. So for those of you out there who care about that, technically you're supposed to do your bit at a 90-degree angle. To me, it's not a big enough difference, but if you do so choose, then that's the way you can do it, and you'll get the actual correct amount of torque that way. So now that we have the barrel nut installed, we're going to flip this over to install our gas system. So before I get too far ahead of myself with the gas system, I actually want to make sure that I point this out. With the gas tube, if you order it from Faxon, it will come with this little bag around it. First I was confused as to why, but then I realized that it actually has the roll pin in there. So we're going to take this roll pin out. Once I have that roll pin out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this handy dandy Midwest Industries pad over the vise so that I'm not damaging anything, so that I can start the, let me get this size so it sits in here nicely. And I'm going to get the actual gas tube secured to the gas block. So if you look at the front of the gas tube, you'll see this kind of textured end, and there should be a hole in there. Hopefully you can see daylight through there. It's hard to tell with my camera at this angle. But that's the hole that the roll pin is going to go into. And on the bottom here, that's where the actual gas is going to go into the gas tube and into the upper receiver to cycle the action. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this front hole again and line it up with the hole on the top of the gas block here. We're just going to slide that tube in there. So right about there, you're going to be able to see daylight through. That's what you want it to look like. And also very important is you want the curve of the gas tube going up. If you have it upside down when you put the roll pin in, you're going to have a bad time, so make sure that that is up. Alright, sorry about that, my camera fell over. So what I'm going to do is, thankfully the pin from Faxon comes with a bevel. I don't know if that's going to focus on there, but I'm just going to hold that in place there, and then I'm going to try to tap this And I am just knocking everything around, so hopefully I'm not going to mess this up too bad for you guys. Alright, so now that that's started, again I'm going to put my gas tube in. I'm just going to look from the other side to make sure the hole's lined up, and I'm just going to try to tap this the rest of the way in without blocking your guys' view. Alright, so now that it's about there, I'm just going to take a punch just to get it the rest of the way. So now that it's flush on this side, and definitely coming through on this side, we are good to go. Now one thing I didn't mention too, is it's again a good idea to put a little bit of grease on that roll pin to make that a little bit easier. And at this point now we have it installed. Again, super critical that this bend goes up. If it doesn't go up, it won't go into the upper receiver and you have to punch that pin back out. Okay, so now that we have the gas tube attached to the gas block, what we're going to do is we're just going to slide this on. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on camera. If not, I'll show a close-up picture of what this gas port looks like. But we want the gas tube to be perfectly lined up over that and make sure that our gas tube goes into that gas block. Again, this is one of the nice things about this barrel nut is you don't have to worry about lining that up with any specific hole. Once I get it on more or less in place where I need it to, again making sure that it is perfectly centered over that port, I'm going to just take one Allen key and tighten it down on the bottom. Now there are 3 Allen screws. I'm just going to cinch one down. Alright, so now that I have that more or less secured in place, I'm going to flip the upper receiver over, and then I'm going to actually start working on tightening those down. Now one thing I want to mention before I flip this over is once you have this installed, you can look at it from the barrel end or even from the stock end and just look to see if it's actually aligned. Just like on AK sites, you'll be able to visually see that it's not properly aligned. If it's not properly aligned, then you're going to have some gas issues that might be undergassed, and that obviously your gun won't cycle at that point, so we want to avoid that. So again, we're just going to flip this over. Alright, so you see these 3 Allen heads up here. Now what I'm going to do is, now that I cinched down the middle one to just hold it in place, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out these other 2 on both ends, and I'm going to put some thread locker on it. Now Faxon doesn't provide their own, however Midwest Industries does provide some with the rail. It's this green stuff right here. So I'm just going to put a little bit of a dab on the threads. Now you also want to make sure you degrease these. I already did that before today. Well, I did it pretty much as soon as I got it. So these things are already nice and clean. If you don't degrease it, the thread locker won't work. Just going to put a little bit on the threads, and I'm going to just drop it in here. And again, just get that nice and tight. Now I know people who like to actually take a drill and make basically little pre-holes where these things go. I'm not going to do that on this one. While I'm sure it does actually increase the security, I don't necessarily find that entirely necessary myself, but I'm not going to fault you if you want to do that. And again, make these nice and tight. Now Faxon actually, in my opinion, doesn't do a very good job of sending instructions with their stuff, so that is one negative about Faxon. So they don't tell you exactly what torque value to set these to, or at least if they did, it wasn't in a place that was very easy to find. So I'm just going to do what we used to call in the Air Force German torque, which is just where you get it good and tight. So basically get these in here nice and tight. And while the thread locker is still wet, again, I'm going to look down from the chamber or from the muzzle end to make sure everything looks nice and aligned. Again, the last thing you want is to start experiencing gas issues. So now that I've visually confirmed that everything's nice and lined, I'm going to make these nice and tight. Alright, so these are in here nice and tight. Just going to wipe off some excess. And now our gas block is installed and our gas system is fully installed. So I'm going to flip this back over so we can install our handguard. So here is our Midwest Industries handguard. It is a 9-inch one. Now I said earlier there's a bunch of other stuff that I like about it. So you have the T markings up here, which is always good. Now if you're wondering what those might be good for, especially on the upper receiver itself, if you have optics or something with a quick disconnect like the one I'm going to put on here, if for whatever reason you have to take the optic on or off, it's good to be able to put it back at exactly the same slot so you know it's going to hold 0. If you have lasers or anything like that for night vision that you're going to put on the front of it, in order to make sure that you maintain the 0 when you take it off and put it back on, again, it's good to have those T markings. So T markings are something I like to have. It's not 100% necessary, but again, something nice to have. Now this is an M-LOK rail, and you have 7 different sections all the way around for you to actually attach M-LOK sections to, or any M-LOK accessories to. And then you also have a bunch of these QD mounts. So you have one here, one on the 6 o'clock position, and then on the 3 o'clock on the front, and then you have one at the 3 and 9 on the rear section. So that's going to allow you to use any QD slings or anything like that. Any QD accessories are going to be able to mount in just like that. Now the way that this thing actually secures is it's basically like a clamshell design where you have the tension down here at the bottom, and it's going to lock into the barrel nut back here. Now again, definitely read the instructions that Midwest Industries provides, because again, this is where my favorite little tidbit comes in. I'm going to read it out here. Apply the provided green adhesive compound to the outside of the barrel nut. If you apply it anywhere else, it shows you have not read the instructions and you have voided your warranty. So I'm assuming what a lot of people like to do is put the green thread locker on the inside of the barrel nut where it actually attaches to the threads, which again, you don't want to do. Just a little bit of grease, really not that much, and it'll be just fine. So you're going to apply some of that to the outside of this barrel nut, and then you're going to slide the actual handguard on. So just going to take this, apply a little bit on the outside. Alright, so now that we have that applied, I'm just going to take this, and again you want to loosen both screws. In fact, they actually ask for you to remove it, so I might as well do that because again I want to follow the instructions so I don't void my warranty. We're just going to slide this over. So this is where it's important they have a low profile gas block, so you can slide this over the top of that. And we're just going to slide this guy on. Now it's also very important when you're doing it this way is you want to make sure that you properly align the uppers back here. So it's hard with this upper receiver block to actually do this, but one thing I like to do is to take like a QD scope mount and attach it on both ends, because that's going to align it pretty much perfectly as long as it's a full section on the front and back. With this gas block you can't do it. However, if you have the Geisley reaction rod or even the Magpul one, that is going to be an option for you, so something cool you can do. So I'm just going to look down, make sure that this thing is properly aligned. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is going to be our anti-rotation bracket basically. I'm going to put this back in the center, get those holes lined up, and I'm just going to start these screws. So one interesting thing I just learned about this block is because of the way the anti-rotation bracket is here, it won't actually let me clamp around that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this is aligned by hand and just get these screws nice and finger tight, and then I'm going to try to force it into that clamshell just so I can get the proper torque on these while it's in the vise. So the torque that you want on these is 55 inch-pounds, not 55 foot-pounds. There's a very big difference, and you don't want to get that mixed up. Just going to look down, make sure that these things are still properly aligned. It's really important to make sure that these are aligned, especially if you're going to be using backup iron sights like I plan to, because if this thing is slightly rotated in the front, you might actually go outside the bounds of your rear sight as far as windage adjustment to make up for that rotation. So this is where something like the Geisley reaction rod or that Magpul block are going to be better, because again, you're not reliant on clamping around the outside. So that is one downside to the setup that I'm using. So I'm going to set these to 55 inch-pounds, which I'm probably going to have to move the camera for, because with the way the microphone is, I'm not going to be able to do that. So I'm going to tighten these down, and then we'll get back to it. Alright, so these are nice and torqued down now. One thing I want to mention too is, like it says in the instructions, as you're torquing it, make sure you're looking down the length of it to make sure that these things stay aligned, because as you tighten it, it might rotate. Also, as you're torquing it, once you hit the torque value on one, make sure you go back to the other and kind of go back and forth a couple times, because as you tighten one, the other one might lose, have a little bit more life left in as far as turns. So kind of alternate back and forth until they are both at 55 inch-pounds. Not foot-pounds, inch-pounds. All right, now another thing I also want to mention is nowhere in the instructions does it say to put thread locker on those, so I'm not going to do that. Again, don't want to avoid my warranty on camera here. So at that point, now we are done. We have our handguard and gas system installed. And I don't know about you, but I really like the way that this thing is coming out. I think this is going to look really badass on my SBR lower, especially once I get that muzzle device on there, and we get an optic slapped on the top here, which is all coming up next in the next video, along with throwing on a light on the side. So stay tuned for that. I'll have a link after this.